Can you comment on the dark side of masculinity and how that's relevant to the shadow or the beast archetype in the individual man?
Yeah, well, it's a good, important question, and this is one of the reasons I often use wolves and the mythology associated with wolves as good metaphors for this whole thing. Wolf can be a pack animal, right? It can also be the stereotypical lone wolf, which can be very problematic. Uh, and you could say that when men function best, they function well as pack creatures, where there is an established hierarchy and alpha, betas, so forth, supporting staff, and so on. Uh, but there's also another side to that, which is the werewolf, right? The whole mythology of the werewolf. Uh, Back 300-400 years ago, they have actual historical cases of actual werewolf killings in France and Germany, which is also where most of the witch burnings were. It's interesting, and in all probability, they were just psychotic serial killers that these guys were, but they were finding evidence that they were attacking young children and innocent people and ripping them up with claws and fangs and everything, and seen running off howling over the ridge and so forth. There's actual history on this. You can look this stuff up. And then it evolved into the Hollywood version of the werewolf with Lon Chaney, first movie back in the 1920s, I think it was, or 1930s. Anyway, it's very good mythology related to this element within men. Sterling used to describe it as the dark side of a man is equivalent to a junkyard dog. So it's like a very nasty, mistreated, ill-treated dog that when it explodes, it becomes very dangerous. It is in the business of alienating people all the time. So when a man is disconnected from his natural wolf energies, let's say, the danger is that disconnection may take the form of an explosion at some point in time if he's triggered negatively in some way. And then you have the werewolf coming out under the full moon, let's say, as part of the myth, right? Who does horrible things, and the guy wakes up in the morning and has no memory of what he just did. So he's living two lives effectively. They're the split between the better angels and the darker angels. So most of modern psychology is based on the idea of integration. What does it mean to balance the dark side with the light side, right? And the other thing is that a lot of reasons why men like to watch sports or violent movies or violent shows or pornography, whatever it is this becomes a vicarious way of him living out his dark side, right? Others live it out for him. You think of a standard pornography scene, it's kind of weird in a way. You're watching two people have sex, right? And somehow finding that arousing when you're not in it, but you're watching it, you're observing it, right? Or a football game where guys are like being, beating the crap out of each other, a boxing match or, UFC match or what have you. Or a Steven Seagal movie, right, where he never loses a fight, never gets a scratch, right? Always beats the crap out of the bad guys, does it viciously. A lot of men are drawn to this stuff, and the reason why it's so appealing is because it's the dark side being lived out vicariously, right, through someone else. And the only problem there is that if one doesn't have contact with one's own more aggressive capacities, then it tends to get acted out in the players of your life. So shadow qualities, when they're not owned or embraced inwardly, if they're not being played out on the screen or in a boxing match or whatever, they're being acted out by the people in our life. So that's when you have a boss or a coworker who betrays you or speaks ill of you, or a woman who treats you badly, or a series of misfortunes you're faced with. Very, very often it's related to disownership of the shadow side. And so one of the things we do in men's work is we provide a safe forum for guys to step into and embody some of their inner werewolf, let's call it that, or inner beast, right? So that the beast slowly starts working for you rather than against you. And eventually, as you go deeper into this, you start to realize the beast is not separate from you, never has been, right? So the idea of it as being something you have to tame or work with, or a horse that you have to ride, is seen to be only an initial understanding. As you go deeper, you understand you are the horse, you are the wild man, right? So the hairy wild man in the cage in Iron John myth is a part of who we are. He's not some mysterious figure in the woods that's come to initiate us. It only seems like that way initially because we're so divorced from that side of ourselves. But as we go deeper into it, we understand it's part of us. And then everything at that point comes online, and all these aspects are working for you, right? You see that they're all part of who you are. So that's the whole idea. And when guys in the world go out and do all kinds of destructive shit, which they're doing all the time, like this crazy Vegas shooter 2 weeks ago, Stephen Paddock, unusual because he was in his mid-60s, a little older than average, right? But if you look at this guy's life, all the talking heads on TV and all the experts couldn't figure it out, and there was no obvious solution. He wasn't radicalized. There was nothing why he did this. He was a millionaire. He had a Filipino girlfriend who was kind of clued out about their relationship. He had a brother who was a freak and all kinds of things. But there were no obvious signs of why he would do this. And then they found out about his father. His father used to be on the FBI's most wanted list. He was a bank robber, notorious bank robber. So we say oftentimes the sins of the father get passed on down to the son, even more so if the son hasn't done his inner work to integrate his own darker angels, right? And so the movie Amadeus, 1984 Amadeus, the story of Mozart's life, is an example of a man who could channel his wound with his father into something creative through his music, although they dramatized it in that movie. And then he dropped dead at 35, so that was not the best story, but he still took the wound with the father and channeled into something creative. In my own journey, growing up with my father, who was a very intense, dynamic personality, I had done years of processing work before I came to the realization that I was a lot like my father, and that was the big eureka. So as we say sometimes in the men's work, the moment you understand that you're a lot like your father is the moment where you become a man. And it doesn't mean you're exactly like him. You have a different set of qualities, different set of conditioning. He may have been a bad guy, or may have been a good guy, whatever. But the point is to see that he's not something separate from you, just like the beast is not something separate from you, right? It's an aspect of your own nature. And then you start to understand the perfection of your family system and the father you had and the brothers you have, or, how they are all essential reflections of parts of your own psyche and your own nature. And when I had that eureka with my father, when I understood that I could be as dark as he could be, or as intense or scary or volatile as he could be, there was a sense of growing up in that moment. Like I really have no one else to blame here anymore. It's enough already. Like assigning cause in your misfortunes in your life to someone else, like someone outside of your own reality, right? And so shadow work is all about reclaiming those darker parts of our own nature, which begins with the relationship with the father, the healing of that wound. In all sorts of darker forms. I mean, Freud, a large part of his psychology was about this, understanding how when men don't adapt to the world, when they live life in an anti-authoritarian mindset, it's because they're not healed with the father. And so one of the modern versions of that is if a lot of guys that are into conspiracy theories, for example, did we really land on the moon? What are they spraying over our heads, these airplanes with their chemtrails? Who caused 9/11? Is there a deep state? All this stuff that goes on the planet right now is always concerned with conspiratorial thinking. That's not to say that there aren't deep states and there aren't things, crazy stuff that goes on in the world, but when there's a preoccupation with that, guys will use that as an excuse to not step into their own power, right? And that conspiratorial thinking has its mindset, has its origins in not being in ownership of one's own dark side and the wound with the father in particular. So when you're unhealed with the father, you're anti-authoritarian by nature, or antinomian, as we say. And so you're always acting out against the authority structures of the world. And guys in that boat often struggle with success because they're too busy resenting older successful guys to become successful themselves. So shadow work and working with the dark side of the masculine nature is a large part about reclaiming one's personal power, so that you can get on with the business of being a full-blooded, fleshed-out man who is successful in life.